So the nervous system is comprised of neurons and neuroglial cells, or glial cells. There are about 100 billion neurons in the human nervous system, and about 10 times that many glial cells. The glial cells provide metabolic support and electrical insulation for the neurons or the nerves. They're Schwann cells. Those are the glial cells of the peripheral nervous system that form a myelin sheath around the peripheral nerves. Oligodendrocytes form a myelin sheath or white matter in the central nervous system. Astrocytes play a role in the central nervous system metabolism and regulating the extracellular ionic concentrations. So they're going to filter the extracellular fluid. Ependymal cells are really important because they form the epithelial lining of the ventricular system. It's the ependymal cells that produce the CSF, or cerebrospinal fluid. And then there's these microglial cells. That's the little picture with the orange background. Those microglial cells act as macrophages in the presence of neuronal damage or disease. So they're the central nervous system's private little immune function. Then the neurons in the human body no longer reproduce. Like, you're born with the number of neurons you're going to have. But the neuroglial cells can undergo constant reproduction, which is where many of our brain tumors arise from. Neurons, aka nerves, are the functional cells of the nervous system. They're communicating with other neurons, muscle cells, glandular and endocrine tissue in order to carry out all human physical and mental functions. It consists of a soma, or cell body. That's the big part in the middle. And they communicate with the soma's the big part in the middle. Collections of somas make up the gray matter. So when we talk about gray matter of the spinal cord or gray matter of the brain, that's a collection of cell bodies in one spot. The axons carry impulses away from the cell body. Those are usually myelinated. And because they're myelinated, they appear white in color. And that forms the white matter of the brain or the spinal cord. Then there are dendrites. They're a little bit shorter than the axons, and they receive the impulses. So they'll actually connect to the axons and take the impulses into the cell body. When parts of the nerves are compressed, they stop working. They stop working right, and they often cause pain depending on which nerve is compressed. So take a minute, get those notes down, and then we'll move on to the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is responsible for conducting impulses to and from the brain. It's also a reflex center in and of itself. It's continuous with the medulla and the brainstem, and then runs down to about L2. The spinal cord consists of a central gray matter shaped like a butterfly. Again, this is where those neuron cell bodies are located. They're definite dorsal and posterior horns of the butterfly. This is where the afferent or sensory nerves enter. And then there are definite ventral or anterior horns of the butterfly. And this is where the efferent motor nerves come in. And then there's also a gray commissure that connects the left and right horns. Surrounding the central gray matter is the white matter. That's made up of the myelinated axons from the neurons located in the gray matter of the central nervous system. That's where the nerve tracts ascend up to the brain, which is referred to as ascending nerve tracts. And then there are nerve tracts that descend from the brain back to the body. There's an anterior median fissure that can be identified more profoundly on posterior. I'm sorry, the anterior is more profound than the posterior. And then there's a central canal right in the middle, and that's where our CSF runs through. So it actually flows over the brain, goes down through the central canal, and then it goes back up the spinal cord through the dura. So let's take a minute and identify the anatomy. So again, our anterior fissure and our posterior fissure, our anterior horns and posterior horns, the central canal, and these are our nerve roots. So we have nerve roots that come directly off of the spinal cord, and then they'll converge and form a ganglia. A ganglia is just a group of cell bodies. And then that disperses off to the rest of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so how does it actually work again? Let's just think about it. So we have receptors that are in your skin or collecting information. Those receptors are going to receive impulses, which are sent up the spinal nerve, through the ventral nerve root. Let's do this. So the impulses are sent up the spinal nerve, through the ventral nerve root, it's integrated and sent up the ascending longitudinal nerve tracts of the spinal cord itself. And then a response is made and gets sent down the descending nerve tracts, out the anterior horn, down the spinal nerve, into the body. Okay, so it's going to receive, and then it's going to send. And all of that's done without you having to think about it. Again, it receives impulses up the spinal nerve, through the ventral nerve root, through the ascending longitudinal nerve tract to the CNS, or spinal ganglion, where a reflex would happen. The impulse is integrated in either the brain or the spinal cord, and then the response is sent back down to the body through the descending longitudinal nerve tract. So the area of the body nerves innervate depend on the level at which they exist in the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is divided into segments that correlate with the level of the spine itself. There are 31 spinal nerves, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, 1 coccygeal. At each level, the ventral root and dorsal root combine to form the spinal nerve. Multiple nerves are going to exit the spine and group up, forming nerve networks or nerve plexus. Each plexus then becomes responsible for an entire area of the body. C1 through C4 forms the cervical plexus. Those innervate the eyes, the parotid glands, the scalp, the base of the skull, the neck muscles, the diaphragm. C5 through T1 make up the brachial plexus, and that innervates the neck muscles and the shoulders, the elbows and the arms, the hands, the fingers, as well as the esophagus and the heart and the lungs. Then L1 through L4 is the lumbar plexus. L4 through S4 is your sacral plexus. The spinal cord itself runs through the vertebral column as a continuation of the medulla oblongata, or the brainstem. It begins at the foramen magnum, the hole in the skull, and it terminates around L1 or L2, where it splits into what we call the cauda equina, which is simply a collection of nerve roots at that point. So make sure you know what the foramen magnum is, and make sure you know what the cauda equina is and where it terminates, or where the spinal cord terminates. All right, and I mentioned the spinal cord runs through the vertebral column itself. When we have the opportunity to get back in lab, we'll probably set up some simulated laminectomies so you can understand it a little bit better and see the anatomy of the spine. All right, we're going to pause again and let you process all that. Go ahead and take your notes, and then we'll get started on the next section in a moment.